as an eye surgeon, humanitarian and social entrepreneur, has enriched his life with extraordinary characters and confronting experiences. He has witnessed powerful stories of resilience that he's going to share with us tonight. And he explores the critical elements needed to build resilience at all levels. Those of you who've just joined us by being here tonight, this is a Raising the Bar Adelaide event, and these events started in New York with the intention to turn pubs into classrooms to combine education and pop culture. The event's been around the world from Hong Kong, London, Auckland, Sydney, and the city of Norwood, Payneham and St Peters. And we're very proud to bring it to Adelaide. So there are 9 other pubs and bars around the city tonight hosting talks by academics and esteemed speakers. And we hope you enjoy it. And there is a social media hashtag if you'd like to post any photos or experiences. And it's hashtag RTBADL. So Raising the Bar Adelaide. And we look forward to seeing some creative posts when we get into the council offices tomorrow morning. So please be respectful of our speaker tonight and please enjoy James Muecke.
Thank you very much, Gail. Thank you to the City of Norwood, Payneham and St Peters for holding the Raising the Bar event. It's actually a great initiative and it's really exciting to be a part of it. And what a brilliant space. I've actually never been here before to the brewery, so it's just lovely to see it. Can you all hear me up the end? It's all good? Do you want me? Oh, yeah, but I can't really use it, so, yeah. Stay away from the speakers? Yeah. Okay, right. Okay, I'll hide back here. So, yeah, interesting year for me. When I received the award back at the Australia Day weekend, within the first couple of weeks, I had something like 60 speaking engagements booked for the year. And when the pandemic struck, you know, one by one, they were all crossed off. So I was left with not much to do, but I created a number of keynote presentations and I started delivering them by webinar and doing podcasts and just getting active on social media just to try and make the best of this extraordinary year that we're having. And so this is only my 6th live presentation this year, going from 60 in the first couple of weeks to 6 now. So, and actually I have 3 keynote presentations and this is the first time I've given this one. So bear with me. So, it's all about resilience. So as Gail said, I'm an eye surgeon, and the commonest operation that an eye surgeon has to perform is removal of cataract. And cataract is the leading cause of blindness in the world. It's a clouding of the lens inside the eye that slowly develops as we age. The microsurgical extraction of a cataract is one of the most exacting of any operation performed anywhere on the body. Let me immerse you in the world of cataract surgery and of microsurgery for just a moment. How's that? Is that really feedback? Is that really bad? Not great. Maybe we'll go for the handheld one. Excuse me. Hello? Is that better? Okay, we'll go for that. So this picture here is an image of a cataract operation in progress. In their hand, at the top of the image, the surgeon is holding a probe, which is inserted into the eye through a little slit in the cornea, through the dilated pupil, and through an opening in the capsule that surrounds the lens of the eye. And the tip of the probe then emits a high-frequency ultrasound wave which breaks up the clouded lens matter that constitutes the cataract. Your beer's ready. or your chicken nuggets. So the high-frequency ultrasound waves break up the clouded lens matter, and you can then extract it from the eye. Now you can see the capsule that surrounds the lens is very, very thin. It's about 10% of the thickness of the finest cellophane, and it's suspended from the inner wall of the eye by a series of fine fibres, what we call zonules, which are about 1% of the diameter of a human hair. And the surgeon has to remove the entire contents from within that capsule. It's about 1/4 of a milliliter without rupturing the capsule or without displacing it from its location at the front part of the eye. So surgery doesn't get much more precise than that, or exciting. A few years ago, I was prematurely forced to give up this thrilling and life-changing surgery. I had to dig deep. I really had to draw on my personal resilience. I'd prepared much of my life to become a doctor and then a surgeon, only to have to give it up, perhaps 20 years before I would have otherwise done so. So it was a tough time for me. Now, what exactly is resilience? Now, we're hearing a lot about resilience at the moment, aren't we, during this pandemic? Now, resilience is the ability to withstand the unexpected changes and challenges, indeed adversities that life constantly throws at us. I do like the expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that just about sums it up, doesn't it? So resilience, or the need for resilience, can be experienced at a personal level, it can be experienced as part of a group or an organisation, or from time to time, the entire world, such as exactly what we're going through at the moment, most of us. So this evening, I'm going to share some stories with you. I'm going to share a story, a powerful story of resilience in the face of tremendous adversity in a man that suddenly went blind in both eyes. I'm going to share a story of resilience amongst a group of disabled, disadvantaged children in an impoverished country in Asia. And I'm going to share with you my own story of loss of ability to use my right hand due to a neurological condition. And I'm going to explore the elements needed to forge resilience in the face of these unexpected changes in life as I go through the telling of these stories. So, I'm a surgeon, but more than anything, I consider myself a doctor. Now, I wanted to be a doctor for as long as I could remember. And there are lots of reasons why someone would want to put all of those long, hard years into studying medicine. What was it in me that drove me down this pathway? Was it the thought of one day slicing into a human body, alive or dead? Was it that TV series, Daktari, which I used to love as a little child, about the doctor in East Africa? Who remembers Daktari? Probably some of these young ones don't. Or was it that anatomy kit, the Visible Man, that my parents gave me for my 8th birthday? Well, I don't believe it was any of these things. I'm afraid that money may have been my driving motivation. You see, my mother instilled in me a very expensive taste in clothing. I had to become a doctor. How else was I going to afford to dress like that? Of course, I'm only joking. In fact, towards the end of my degree, I was seriously considering dropping out of medicine to design and build furniture. Not a very lucrative... Hello? Oh, there we go. It's back. Not a very lucrative career move, right? I'm not joking this time. Here's one of my creations from 5th year medical school. A psychedelic postmodern coffee table. What was I thinking? Probably more to the point, what had I been taking? It was a university, after all. And I'm sure you're all thinking, thank goodness he stuck with medicine. Well, that I did, and ultimately graduated from the University of Adelaide in 1988. By the end of my internship that year, I was over it. Those interminable years of study through high school and medical school, the trials and tribulations of internship with its killer 34-hour shifts. I was also becoming quite disillusioned. This was my first year of practicing real medicine, and I was mainly just dealing with patients who had chronic diseases that were more often than not self-inflicted diseases that were due to primarily smoking, and we were starting to see nutritional poor diet also coming in at that stage. I really wanted and needed something different. Africa, with its majestic wildlife, its endless savannas and deep, dark jungles had been calling since my childhood, when I used to sit in front of the TV absolutely transfixed by Kimber the White Lion, Tarzan of the Apes, and of course, Daktari. So I saved through my intern year, my first year of earning money, so that I could volunteer as a general doctor in Kenya, in East Africa. Now, before I started work, I wanted to go and visit the gorillas in Rwanda. And as you can see, Rwanda is to the southwest of Kenya. It's a landlocked country. Now, I couldn't afford to fly. I had to go by land. Initially, I took the night train from Nairobi to the border with Uganda, then on through southern Uganda. And actually, much of Uganda was in civil war at the time. And I eventually made it to the southwest corner of the country, the only safe part of the country, when Idi Amin, the former brutal dictator of Uganda, was attempting to re-enter this country that had deposed of his evil rule a few years before. Idi had sent an advance party of rebel soldiers to pave the way for his return, and I just happened to find myself in the very same village at the very same time that this group of men decided to stop for the night. The moment I set foot in this village, and I was actually with a travelling companion, a guy called Mike from New York City. The moment we set foot, we were surrounded by this ragtag and heavily armed bunch of men. They tore apart our backpacks looking for weapons. Of course, they didn't find any weapons, but they found our binoculars, and so they accused us of being spies. They actually told us that they'd seen us spying on them from the hills above the village. And they marched us away at gunpoint, and they locked us in a ramshackle hut at the edge of this village. They told us to behave ourselves, and then they left us alone in that hut. You can imagine we were absolutely petrified. We were convinced if we stayed in that hut and in that village, we were done for. Mike from New York had never left New York City before. He'd seen gorillas in the mist the year before and was coming to Africa just to see the gorillas. He was freaking out. Somehow, I managed to keep a cool head. And I decided we had to get out of there. So we broke out the back of the hut and escaped the village into the jungle behind. That deep, dark African jungle that I dreamed about as a kid. That wild, sharp-toothed jungle at night time. And an African jungle at feeding time is not the place you want to be. Now, there's more to that story. Unfortunately, we haven't got time for it tonight, and obviously I survived to tell the tale. I did eventually get to see the gorillas in Rwanda, and that was one of my photographs, and then ultimately made it back to Kenya and headed north from Nairobi to a little place called Tumutumu Hospital, which was to be a base for the year. It's in the village of Tumutumu, and this is the pathway to the hospital. You can see it's a beautiful area at the foothills of the Aberdare Mountains in central Kenya, absolutely stunning. Now it's finally become my own real-life Daktari. And this is me with one of my patients. She was a young Samburu girl, and Samburu tribal area was just north of where the hospital lay, and her father was actually one of the guards at the hospital. And she was admitted a week or so before with a very severe bout of malaria. In fact, she was on death's door, but she made a rapid and complete recovery, and this was actually her day of discharge. And we all took turns taking photographs with her because she was so stunning. This is a year that changed my life. I loved the fact that I could cure people, that I could make a difference, so easily. And this was in stark contrast to my internship. I was now seeing patients that had diseases that weren't self-inflicted, that were mainly infectious diseases like malaria and tuberculosis. My morning ward rounds, you just knew which patients were ready for discharge. They'd be sitting bolt upright in their beds with a huge smile on their faces, like this man who was one of my patients. Jumbo Daktari, Hakuna Matata, Nyumbani Leo, I'm ready to go home. It was fantastic. It was such a thrill, and it actually reinvigorated a love of medicine for me. It forged in me a desire to pursue a career in public health. Now, the idea of using microsurgery to cure cataract in poorer parts of the world was really appealing. So I headed home to Australia to study ophthalmology and ultimately to become an eye surgeon back in 1990. Gone again. Whoops. I've been an eye surgeon now for 30 years. And for 30 years, I've been dealing with the consequences that diabetes inflicts on the eyes. In fact, every year, I'm seeing more and more people who are losing vision, even going blind due to diabetes, in particular type 2 diabetes, which makes up about 90% of cases and is essentially a preventable dietary disease related to the consumption of too much sugar in our modern diet. In 2018, though, I met a man whose story had a really powerful impact on me. His name is Hansel. An everyday Aussie bloke with a wife and 4 kids. He constructs light machinery for a living, and he also has type 2 diabetes. And a few years ago, at the age of 50, diabetes changed Neil's world forever. Unfortunately, he'd neglected his disease, and he paid the price. He went to bed one evening with normal sight and woke up the next morning blind in both eyes. One of my colleagues worked really hard to try and retrieve his sight. And unfortunately, it was too late, and Neil was to spend the rest of his life in darkness. Neil lost his driving licence, he lost his independence, and he lost his ability to teach the javelin. It was actually his hobby. In fact, it was a passion that gave him incredible joy. But the thing that upsets Neil the most is that he can no longer see the beautiful smiles on the faces of his wife and his grandkids. This is a picture of Neil's wife and 2 of his grandkids. This is how we should see them. And this is the reality. Neil has been irreversibly blinded by sugar. So I met Neil, as I said, in late 2018. I was actually filming a documentary about the experience of blindness, what it means to be blind. And his story just blew me away. I found out that he was still working the same job that he had when he lost his vision. What a great boss, right? He constructs light machinery, as I said, so he doesn't need to use his sight. He could use his fingers, his hands, his sense of touch to put the machinery back together again. But the thing that really blew me away was that he'd taken on a new hobby. I mentioned that he'd had to give up teaching the javelin. But he took on a new hobby, wood turning. Can you imagine? Shaping a length of wood, spinning at 1,000 revolutions per minute with razor-sharp blades and no sight. Amazing, isn't it? So I asked Neil, how do you do it? This was his response. Not working. Is Alex there? It should just automatically play, but it's sound's not coming through. It's kind of an important part of the presentation. Intermission, have another chicken nugget.
It's definitely on as far as you're saying.
It always works.
Do you just press escape for me and see? 'Cause it should be all running through here. Because it was working, wasn't it? The sound.
Turn off the music, so that makes sense.
I don't think so. And then go to.
It's on 100%.
It's in the decimeter, isn't it? Yeah. Just play it again. Should be on the loudest possible.
Put it on here, we've got to play it down. You can actually see the point glasses on.
If not, I'll just have to run it through the projector, which hopefully should have its own sound. Which we can do.
I know what I...
There we go. I don't know why I didn't do that, but...
Yeah, but it's actually, let's hope it.
There's a, yeah. It was working, but I don't know why. Okay. Hopefully, yeah. Just wait here.
Let's give that a go. Fingers crossed it works. It was working before. So,
I know what I need to do in the day. I know what I need to achieve in my day to make my day good, whether that be work-related, family-related, it doesn't matter. my outlook is I woke up and I can put one foot in front of the other. And as long as I can do that, nothing else can affect me.
So I can put one foot in front of the other. The sad thing is, Neil can no longer put one foot in front of the other. In March this year, he had his left leg amputated for gangrene due to his type 2 diabetes. In fact, this was his 9th amputation over a 14-month period after he'd gone blind in both eyes. Also had had 2 heart attacks. But amazingly, Neil was back at work 2 weeks later. And here he is, testing out a piece of machinery. Hello? That he just put back from his wheelchair. So once again, I asked Neil, how do you do it?
It's better to get it out than bottle it up. Worst thing you can do is bottle it up. It really is. That just brings you down. Black dog comes and gets you and you're buggered. So get it out, speak about it, yell about it, scream about it. Get people to listen. Get people to realise that the loss of just one of your senses, it'll either make you or break you. And I ain't going to let it break me.
So I ain't going to let it break me. Neil is clearly a resilient character, isn't he? And the key to Neil's resilience is his positivity. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Once I'd finished my ophthalmology training, I headed to the Middle East to work at St. John's Eye Hospital in Jerusalem. And for me, this is another unbelievable year, one of the best years of my life, and I went there with my new wife. My first wife, but she was new. I was able to hone my microsurgical skills, particularly for cataract. As I mentioned, it's the leading cause of blindness in the world, particularly in poorer parts of the world. But the other thing I really loved was the outreach visits to perform eye clinics in the refugee camps of the Gaza Strip in the West Bank. And this is a picture of the team on one of our trips to the West Bank. And this really cemented in me a passion for fighting blindness in poorer parts of the world. After this year in Jerusalem, I studied eye cancer at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, and then ultimately came back to Adelaide to settle in 1998. And working as a consultant at the Women's and Children's Hospital and the Royal Adelaide Hospital. Now, to keep my love of fighting blindness in poorer communities alive, I started immersing myself in a number of research and teaching projects in Asia, and this ultimately culminated in the formation of Sight for All in 2008. Now, people quite often ask me, how did I get involved in humanitarian work? Well, to me, what I call humanitarian spirit is related to life experiences, powerful life experiences, and it's these experiences that can ultimately result in a passion to want to make a difference, to make a change in the world. I just want to share a couple of those experiences with you now. The first came in 2007. I was part of a team from the Royal Adelaide Hospital conducting a study in Myanmar in Southeast Asia, a study to determine the causes of blindness amongst children in schools for the blind across this poorest of countries. And what we found was absolutely staggering. We found that the leading cause of blindness was, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the leading cause of blindness might be in a poor country in 2007? Good diet, river blindness, all good points, but not? No, all good, but not quite. It was actually measles. So measles is the leading cause of blindness amongst children. Now, I'm going to show you a picture. I hope you've all finished your dinner. I'm going to show you a picture of a little boy who's blind from measles. So that's what it looks like. And I took this confronting image during that study in Myanmar in 2007. Measles in susceptible children who've not been vaccinated can irreversibly destroy the cornea, or the delicate window at the front of our eyes, the window to our sight. And it's a good it's a good example why we should have vaccination, right? This is a sign of a poor country, a country that back in 2007 was unable to protect its children against this entirely avoidable outcome. Costs less than $1 to prevent measles in a child, less than $1 to prevent this horrific image. At every school for the blind that we visited across the country, we were surrounded by children that looked like this little boy. It was one of the most disturbing experiences of my medical life. It made me realise that there's so much more to blindness than just cataracts. And it really drove home for the first time how powerful prevention is in medicine. Our studies went on to find that measles was the leading cause of blindness in 2 other countries where we performed studies, in Cambodia in 2008 and Laos in 2013. Amongst a sea of children who are blind from measles in each of these 3 countries, we occasionally found children who are poorly sighted, even blind, because they've never been tested for spectacles. Here's a powerful moment from our study in Laos in 2013.
Once he gets correct glasses, he can go back to his home. So, thanks. Perfect. He's very keen to have glasses.
We lost the sound again there, but you got the idea, I think. I mean, it's such a special moment when that little boy says, "Wow," isn't it? But this is actually a sign of a really awful scenario and a completely preventable scenario. Imagine being parent to a child that's blind, or a brother or sister to a child that's blind, living away from home in a school for the blind, receiving a substandard education with limited prospects. Hello? Yep. Sorry. With limited prospects for a well-paying career and a fruitful life because you'd never been tested for spectacles. Because there was simply no one there to provide that basic service, something that we take for granted here in Australia. Of all of the children at schools for the blind in poorer parts of the world, nearly half had blindness that could have been prevented or treated, so nearly half even be there. So imagine of these children, a multitude of hazards and dangers in front of them, none of the social supports or educational opportunities that we have here in Australia. And yet they were happy, and they got on with their lives. Here's a picture of a group of children at School for the Blind in Myanmar playing soccer. They'd found an old soccer ball and they made a cut at it and they inserted a smaller ball inside it so that they could hear it rattling as it rolled along. And they were having a ball. They were having so much fun, just like kids love to do. And this is little Dinta. I met Dinta at a school for the blind in Laos in 2013. And Dinta was irreversibly blind, but could have been sighted if appropriate medical attention had been present in his country at birth. And Dinta sang this amazing song for us, and I'm going to play it for you now, or a little excerpt from it. There, we've lost the sound again. It's also a special one. How are we going, Alex? Have another chicken nugget. Yep. Yeah. Isn't it? Do that before.
Closer. I'll just see if. Really try playing that. Change the audio.
Yeah.
Sound.
Where? It's 100%.
So you should come up with like the sound coming out to export out the speakers. So go to speakers.
Do you want to do it? Oh,
Yes.
yes. Actually, hang on a sec. That's. Why is
You
that?
just want to open up, right click.
Why has that got a? It's got a cross on it there.
Yeah, so here I'll just
Why is it? Anyone know any good jokes? Sorry, this is very unusual. It hasn't happened before. I actually gave a presentation last night and it worked beautifully. If it doesn't work, we'll just press on. I think what I might do, I reckon that could even be the last little video. I'll play it for you anyway because it's actually, because he's singing in Laotian language, there's the writing there. It's a beautiful song and he's got a beautiful voice, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to hear it. So I'll just, what I would do though, this is a good way to drive you to our website, isn't it? So if you go to our website, siteforall.org, and at the end I'll put it up, you go to the Media Centre and you'll see there's a film called Please Don't Rush. So this is actually extracted from that documentary, which was actually selected for New York Film Festival and St Kilda and a few others. So highly recommend you go and see that and look at some of the other videos and documentaries that we've done. Okay, so I'll just play that. If we don't have the sound, just read the words anyway. So dreams are still possible. There is no day of blindness. Now that's what I call resilience, right? And we're going to come back to Dinter's positive approach a little later once again. So it was about this time in my life that I was starting to have my own difficulties. I found that when I was performing surgery, particularly cataract surgery, I was holding that probe that I showed you before with my right hand with increasing force. And that was giving rise to a discomfort in my right hand, and cramping, if you like, which was particularly noticeable during a long operating list. It wasn't impacting on my surgical skills, but it was starting to concern me. I was also having some difficulty holding my pen and consequently with my writing with my right hand. And that was terribly frustrating because I'd always had pristine handwriting. At high school, my agricultural science exercise books had been kept by the school and placed in the school library. Amazingly, I managed to track them down quite recently, and I was amazed and a little disturbed to see my handwriting. This is not normal for a teenage boy, right? I should have been out chasing girls, I'm sure. In first year medical school, I dissected free the spinal cord of a cockroach, completely intact. much to the envy of my colleagues. I was clearly born for microsurgery, wasn't I? But over the years of medical school, my handwriting really started to deteriorate. I just presumed it was those countless hours spent scribbling lecture notes that was giving rise to this messy scrawl that's the trademark of doctors the world over. But over the years, my writing got smaller and tighter. I used to have regular breaks to shake my hand out, and I even devised a whole series of hieroglyphs and acronyms to reduce the amount of documentation that I needed to do in my patients' case notes. It wasn't until 2012 that I actually found out what was going on. I gave one of my neurological colleagues a call and I described my symptoms to him. And he said, you have the classical symptoms of focal dystonia. So focal dystonia, what exactly is focal dystonia? Certainly didn't learn about it at medical school. Well, focal dystonia is there we go. Focal dystonia is a cortical neurodegenerative condition that tends to affect people whose profession demands precision in the use of their hands. Surgeons, musicians, writers, just to name a few. When the brain tells a given muscle to contract, at the same time it has to silence those muscles that would oppose that movement, right? So when you're performing really complex movements with your dominant hand, there's an amazing array of signals going back and forth between the hand and the brain. So focal dystonia interferes with that. And it does have a genetic component to it. There is a genetic causation behind it. Now, not so long ago, I was actually listening to some cassette tapes of my father's voice. Now, we were living in America in the 1970s, early 70s, and Dad used to dictate letters, which he sent as tapes back to my grandparents at home in Adelaide, just to keep them abreast of what we're up to. And I was absolutely gobsmacked to hear Dad's words. Have a listen. I don't think we're going to get that audio either. I'm really sorry about this. So Dad was actually, what he is describing is exactly the same symptoms that I was having. So Dad was 36 at the time, and Dad had exactly the same condition that I had. We always knew that Dad, back from the grave. Anyway, so where was I? So we always knew Dad had bad handwriting. He used to hold the pen in a really weird way. But it wasn't until actually I found out what the diagnosis was that we knew what was going on with Dad. So it was a relief to finally have an answer to what I was experiencing with my right hand. But with any chronic, slowly progressive medical condition, I'm sure it's impossible to know what awaits. A year later, I was forced to change the writing in my right hand across to my non-dominant left hand. In fact, this is a picture of my patient's case notes. You can see at the top of the page, 2012, that was my very tight scripted handwriting, and you can see down below the more open, in fact, neater handwriting with my left hand. So I was also having problems doing all sorts of other things, daily tasks with my right hand, using the computer mouse, typing on the computer, using the razor blade. I kept on cutting myself shaving, so I bought myself an electric razor. And then as much as possible, I started using my left hand for one-handed tasks, so using the electric razor, using electric toothbrush, even using a spoon with my left hand. Sorry. This keeps on chopping out. Sorry, I'm so sorry. So these days, even signing my name with my right hand is virtually impossible. I still sign my name with my right hand, but you can see how hard I am holding the pen. If I held a champagne glass with my right hand, I would smash it now. And if I pick anything up with my right hand, except for a clicker, my hand actually tends to, anything heavier than this, my hand tends to flex in at the wrist joint quite disturbingly and quite painfully. Now, there is no prevention and there's no cure. I've tried hypnotherapy, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, cerebellar stimulation, sensory motor retraining, kinesiology, all of these things, and nothing's worked. I've even tried acupuncture, but this ancient Eastern form of healing was unable to slow the progression of my dystonia. It's not life-threatening, fortunately, and I'm sure many of you will know people that have had terrible calamities in their lives, and some of you may well have as well. So it's not life-threatening, no, but it is career-destroying, and that is no small thing. In one operating list back in 2013, I had a close call with a cataract operation. Fortunately, it wasn't a disaster. And as I told you before, there's a very fine line between a successful result and a disaster with cataract surgery. But at the end of the list, I finished my operating list, and I turned to the scrub nurse and I just said, I've finished my last cataract operation. And for the next few days, I was pretty shell-shocked. Hello? I wasn't sure whether I'd made a hasty decision. But after a few days, I realised that I'd made the right call. You know, I was putting my patient's eyesight at risk, and I ended up cancelling all my upcoming lists and transferring my patients to my colleagues. So that was a picture of me actually in Jerusalem. So it was a big moment. You know, I'd spent all those years of sacrifice and study, only to give up a major element of what I was doing and loving, you know, perhaps 20 years before my time. So it was this time for me to dig deep, to draw on my resilience, my inner strength. Now, I'd survived the perils of Africa. Surely I could survive this focal dystonia. As well as getting captured by rebel soldiers in Uganda, I also crossed an active civil war zone in Mozambique on an armed convoy. I contracted malaria twice and amoebic dysentery once. The house at the hospital that I was living in Kenya was robbed 5 times, violently. In fact, the only thing I had left at the end of my year in Africa were the dirty clothes on the bottom of my laundry basket after the final robbery. I was even attacked by a whole range of wild animals. So, when a crocodile closes its jaws around your leg, something gets triggered in the brain. Now, we've all heard of it. It's called the fight or flight response. So the emotional, primitive part of the brain is triggered. And it's entirely appropriate. This is a life-threatening situation. You've got to get the hell out of there. But when you're in a less acutely life-threatening situation, perhaps being captured by rebel soldiers or something else you could potentially think of, you don't want that reaction. You want to, I think Mike, my Italian friend, had that reaction, but you want to get control of that reaction. You want your prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking, reasoning, rationing part of the brain, take control to get the upper hand over the emotional part of the brain. And that often takes a couple of minutes. And quite simply, just taking a few deep breaths allows us to get through that process. Another great thing you can do is adopt the superhero pose. Like Superman, you know, putting the clenched fists on your hips, thrusting your chest forward and chin held high. When you adopt the superhero pose, you can take on anything, even a rampaging Congo crocodile. So when you gain the upper hand over your primitive part of the brain, I call this achieving a cool head. Okay? And a cool head, to me, is the first step in building resilience. And when you get a cool head, you're then able to tell yourself, well, I'm going to get through this. And we did hear this quite a bit during the early weeks of the pandemic, and Scott Morrison was telling us, we're going to get through this. So it's really important, because what happens when you tell yourself you're going to get through this, you then start to move into a more positive mindset, don't you? So positivity is the second step in building resilience. And when you're in a positive mindset, you can tell yourself, well, if I'm going to get through this, how am I going to get through this? Well, I'm going to get through this by innovating. So innovating is the third key step in building resilience. And we saw innovation in each of those stories, didn't we? We saw innovation in Neil Hansel, the guy who went blind. He took on a new hobby, wood turning. We saw innovation in those blind kids in Myanmar who found a soccer ball and put a smaller ball inside it so they could hear it rolling along. And you saw the innovations that I used over actually a period of several years to adapt to the slow progressive deterioration and function of my right hand. So cool head, positivity, and innovation. These are, for me, the three key elements for building resilience. But the absolute critical one is positivity. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. There's a way that you can actually start to build a more positive mindset. And I've come up with this concept which I've called 4 good things to building a positive mind. So firstly, good health. So when you're captured by some rebel soldiers in Uganda, you can't suddenly have good health. So it's important to eat well, exercise, avoid sugar and refined carbohydrates. That's the other thing I'm talking about this year. Good sleep. You know, we all know when we don't sleep well, we don't cope as well, do we? We're not as resilient. Good friends. Surround yourself with people who are positive and uplifting, not people who are trying to drag you down. This is really critical, maintaining those positive connections at such a time. And finally, good habits. Let's look at good habits for just a moment. So when in a chronically stressful situation, the brain is also triggering the release of the stress hormone cortisol, albeit on a lower level. And this is not healthy. It's not healthy for our minds, it's not healthy for our bodies. And so the brain needs to balance this cortisol reaction by the release of feel-good chemicals such as dopamine, endorphins. And there are a number of things that we can do to trigger the release of the feel-good chemicals. We can take on bad habits, or we can take on good habits. And some of the bad habits were pretty obvious: drinking too much alcohol, hard drugs, smoking too much sugar. They are also very effective at triggering dopamine release when we're stressed, and that's why people often turn to it, as well as being highly addictive, sugar. But of course, there are a number of good habits that are equally as effective at countering that cortisol reaction that's flooding the body during anxious times. And just some obvious ones are going for a walk out in nature, somewhere beautiful. It's a very uplifting experience. Going for a cycle or a run, of course. Listen to your favourite musical playlist, or reach out to someone else who's in a tough time, who's in a worse situation than you. All of these things trigger that feel-good centre and are actually really positive, useful things to do when you're in a difficult, stressful situation. Now, when the pandemic broke out and things really got thrown in a heap for me, each morning I would wake up early and go for a walk up in the Adelaide hills, and it was just a wonderful thing to do. And I'd get to the top of the hill, and I'd look back down over the city, often looking out over the lights because it was still dark, and it was something that I did. And this comes from the field of neuroscience. It's called neuroplasticity. How we pay attention actually can change the brain. And we know this from a number of studies. And the classic one is a study from the London cab drivers. The hippocampus, which is the memory centre of the brain, is actually larger than the average in London cab drivers. That's because they spend so many hours memorising the street names and places of London. So we can actually also exercise the brain into a more positive mindset. So what I used to do when I got to the top of that hill in the morning was to look out over the city and think of 3 good things, 3 positive things, 3 things I had to look for in that day ahead of me. And at the end of the day, before I went to sleep, I looked back over my day. What were 3 wonderful things that happened during the day? 3 things that I had to be grateful for. And at a really difficult time in my life, I must say I'd never felt more positive. So it was an amazing feeling. And there's actually, as I said, there's some real neuroscience behind it. And a classic study from Emmons and McCulloch in 2003 showed that just a couple of minutes a day of doing that, positive reinforcing messages to yourself, actually does help move you into a more positive mindset. So I would recommend it as something for all of you to do. It's just a great way of just creating a more positive mindset. So a cool head, a positive approach, innovation, these to me are the 3 key elements to building resilience. Now, me myself, because of this problem with my hand, I'm faced with the end of my medical career, probably sometime in the next year or 2. trying to retain a cool head. I'm trying to be positive. In fact, I'm embracing where the future lies for me. And I'm doing innovation to get me there. What have I learned through my life, particularly my medical life? Well, I've learned that prevention is getting worse, isn't it? Be positive. It's going to work. So I've got to get home to bed tonight and think back over my day and not let this upset me. It was actually really good. Everyone was laughing, so that's positive, isn't it? So preventing disease before it sets in is much better than trying to cure. Maybe I'll just give this up. Can you hear me? So, sit down. Battled with that long enough. It's worse than the Congo crocodile. So, yeah, preventing disease before it sets in, much better than trying to treat the disease after it's already established. And if you have a disease or a condition that's not preventable, or if it's too late for treatment, or if a cure is not possible, then you have to go into that battle ahead of you prepared. And if you make the most of everything that your life has to offer, if you make the most of every opportunity, every adventure, you'll have so many more weapons to take into that battle. So thank you, and I wish you all the very best in your life ahead of you. Yeah, so that was quite a battle, wasn't it? Wow. So I'm just putting up some social media handles. Those of you who want to follow sites, or you can subscribe to our newsletter on the homepage. As I said, go and look at some of the movies that we've created. Some really interesting ones, a number in Asia and a number in Aboriginal communities as well. Very interesting. If you want to follow my journey this year, Australia of the Year, there's also a number of social media handles that you can follow. So I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but I'm happy for a few. Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I don't have a bold voice, so we will need the microphone. But yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. So a big thank you to James Muecke. Thank you so much for coming out. Is that okay if we have time for a few questions? Yeah. So, I mean, an amazing talk. You've obviously had a full life, lots of experiences which we can all learn from. Obviously, tonight you've shown us how to use those three steps: your cool head, positivity, and hopefully innovation. Now that it works. Yeah. So we're going to hand over to the audience now for a question. Oh. Perfect, straight away. What we'll do, if you're okay, can you hear us?
I'll try. It seems to be working now. That's not fair. Maybe I'm holding it the wrong way. Yeah. Well, to be honest, I was actually pretty impressed by ScoMo earlier in the year. I found in those early weeks, I thought his messaging was positive, and I think, you know, as I said, he was saying, we're going to get through this. He was saying that almost every day when he got on TV, we're going to get through this. And it's really important when you have a difficult situation to say, yeah, you are going to get through this. And so I did like his messaging. I did think it was clear. And the other one who I feel, to me, was really good, really positive, was Stephen Marshall. Stephen was always positive, always giving strong, positive messages. You know, look at Daniel Andrews' face when he's on the TV at the moment. You know, it's not a happy face, but Stephen was always positive. So I feel Stephen. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know, you know, the WA or the Queensland premiers that well, but I just felt that Stephen and Scott Morrison both did a really good job of keeping us positive and getting us through this, and also their teams, their health teams, Nicholas Spurrier, who actually got nominated for an award. I actually thought she was going to get the award because I actually presented it to the next recipient last week, and I thought it was going to be Nicola. So when she wasn't Nicola, I was a bit surprised. But I think she did a fantastic job as well, getting us through this. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, you want to hear the rest of the jungle story? Okay. Yeah. How long have we got? It was okay. So into the jungle, and it was literally dusk, just nightfall had happened, and the jungle, or the village, actually faced on what was called the Queen Elizabeth II National Park. If anyone's been to Uganda, back in 1989, it wasn't a nice place at all. It's, I think, a lot better these days, but still troubled. So into the jungle, and we realised that this wasn't a good place to be, and we made our way, kind of heading away from the village in the general direction of where we thought the road was, and eventually we did get to a road, and we waited by the roadside, and we were quite some distance, and it was pitch black by this stage, and a car comes. This was a very remote. This was the border of Zaire, which was Zaire now Democratic Republic of Congo, border of Zaire and Uganda, Ruwenzori mountain range, incredibly remote, middle of nowhere. And this car does turn up, and I go running up to the guy, I sort of hail him down and say, "We wanted to get to this village, which is 30 kilometres away. You know, are you going in that direction?" And he said, "Yeah, jump in." There were two guys in the car. So Mike and I jumped in the back seat of the car and headed down the road, and we were passing the village we just escaped from. And rather than keeping on going, he actually turned into the village. And it's just a tiny village. It was just like just one dusty road with a few huts on either side. And there was a little, we couldn't even really call it a service station, but it was somewhere where you could go and get some petrol for the car. And it was sort of black market petrol. So this guy pulls in, or these two pull in, and then they say, "We'll be back in a moment." And they go, and they went for about probably close to an hour. And we were both sitting in the back seat, absolutely, excuse my language, shitting ourselves. Thinking that these soldiers were going to come back out at any moment and find us there. So we sunk right down in the back of the seat. Eventually these guys turn up, fill the car with petrol, and off we go. And as we go back onto the road to continue on to the next village, there's a little pub on the corner, and all of these soldiers poured out of the pub and smiled and waved at us, and smiled and waved at the guys driving in the front seat. So they'd been drinking in the pub with these guys, and we thought, "Oh my God, what have we got ourselves into?" Anyway, so we headed off on this 30-kilometre journey, but it was a dusty, bumpy track along the edge of the Ruwenzori mountain range with a huge drop down to the side. Pitch black, no lights, no stars, no nothing. It was just virtually could not see anything. And I'd hitchhike a bit in Africa, and Africans are normally very friendly and chatty. These guys weren't friendly. And they had music blaring. There was a big hole between Mike and I in the back seat, and there was dust and exhaust pouring up into the car. So it was just this really frightening, unpleasant experience. And suddenly this guy just slams on the brakes and stops in the middle of nowhere. And he gets out, and I get out. I mentioned before that Mike was freaking out, so Mike was just, I think, frozen with fear. I got out, and I just followed this guy around to the boot, because I was sure he was going to get a gun out and shoot us and throw us over the edge of the cliff. But he actually got a water container and went round to the bonnet and opened the bonnet, and the radiator was just pouring, it was pouring fluid. So several times during this journey, he had to just top up the radiator with water. But every time, I made sure I just was watching every moment of his, every movement he was making. And we eventually got to that village. But yeah, so I survived, but it was, there were a number of other experiences that happened during, I had 5 days in Uganda trying to get from the border through to Rwanda where the guerrillas were, and every day was an extraordinarily confronting, frightening experience. So, but I think Uganda's must be a much nicer place these days. There was one other question over there. Yeah, so I mentioned about, innovating. In fact, before I received the local award a year ago, and I knew that this was coming to an end. It's interesting. I mentioned with a slowly progressive condition, at what point do you say no? But you can't keep on going. So I've been hanging in there and still managing quite well. It's just at the end of the day, my hands are really sore, and because I still have to use it for lots of tasks. And so I was actually thinking of what am I going to do next, and I actually looked back at the things that I love to do in my life, and you probably see a few of them there. I mean, I love taking photographs. I love making movies and documentaries. I'm enjoying public speaking. I used to hate public speaking. It was the thing that I used to dread more than anything. But so I thought, okay, well, I'll do a potpourri of things. I'll do some keynote speaking. I'll make some documentaries. I'll write a book. I'll do some things. And in fact, I had started prior to receiving the local award, started doing all of those things. I started doing some keynote speaking. I actually made a documentary. In fact, I've made a number of documentaries, but I'm actually starting a documentary series, which I was in Myanmar last year and earlier this year, just finishing that off. And I've started writing a book and just doing all sorts of interesting things, using my skills, which subconsciously, I mean, I hadn't taken or done all of those things with a view to one day, if I have to stop medicine, I've got these things I can fall back on. They were just things that I love to do. I just did them during my week, my year, just doing these things that I enjoyed. And when the time came, when you actually have to draw on those skills, it's been very, very useful for me. But I suspect that having this role this year might open up a whole range of other opportunities. So I've got these things ready to go, but there may be other opportunities that present themselves in the coming months. In fact, I've only really got 3 months to go, but I think by mid-December my role will be pretty much over because we get into the Christmas period. So yeah, watch this space. One more?
Yes, I'm just interested, with your condition, is there any prospect with computer-aided surgery? You know how things are going in some fields with the use of computers and robots, etc. Is that something that's possible?
I'm sure it is. But what's interesting, I think, with these sorts of robotics is that the surgeon who's controlling the robot still has to use those very fine movements to control. And this is one of the things that, when I'm examining patients' eyes, and I've got to hold the lens up, and my hand clamps really tightly on the lens. In fact, I've started using my left hand to hold the lens, but I still need to control the joystick of the microscope. So when I grab the joystick, my hand buckles in like that. So I can still do it, but just those fine movements, the fine skills, the fine examination is just going to get tougher and tougher over the coming months. So at some point, I'm just going to have to say that's it. So it's I think even with these robotics, you still need to use your fine motor control. Even for examining patients' eyes, we have fantastic imaging techniques these days, but there's nothing like using your own eyes and your own fine touch to examine someone's eyes. You can't look at a photograph. You can make a rough diagnosis, but you really need to use your eyes, your stereoscopic vision, to have that really acute ability to diagnose conditions. So, yeah, I don't think, for me, at least in the coming months, there's going to be that option. Thank you again.
I didn't want to stop that applause. Thank you so much. We have a bit of a gift for you for coming out. Yes, another big round of applause, please, for James Muecke. So feel free to hang around, grab another drink if you like, and socialise and enjoy the night. So thank you so much.